there's a movie called Talladega Nights. And one of the characters says a prayer at the dinner table, which goes along these lines. Dear 8 pounds 6 ounce newborn baby Jesus, don't even know a word yet, just a little infant, so cuddly but still omnipotent. Thank you for all your power and your grace, dear baby God. Amen. Later, the host defends himself to the rest of the table by saying, look, I like the baby version of Jesus the best. You hear me? I like the Christmas Jesus best. And I'm saying grace, and when you say grace, you can say it to grown-up Jesus or teenage Jesus or bearded Jesus or whoever you want. I don't read the Old Testament, she said. I don't like it. It's too violent. It's horrible. There's an angry God and all sorts of violence and nightmare type stuff. I'm not interested in that kind of God. I only read the New Testament, the stuff about Jesus. I'm only interested actually in the bits about love and kindness, the loving God, the loving Jesus. That Old Testament stuff is irrelevant. I avoid it. The person who said that must have got stuck when reading the second part of this collection of books we call the Bible, the New Testament. She might have never actually got to the end, to a letter that's in the back that's called the Revelation. If she had, she might not have really liked it. In this letter, and it's not really the only place, it's not really about the baby Jesus. Instead, there's some pretty terrible things which I suppose I would have to say happen on a kind of biblical proportion. Things start in chapter 8 when an angel blows a trumpet, or it's a shofar, a ram's horn used in the Jewish temple, and hail and fire mixed with blood are hurled down on the earth, and then a third of the earth is affected. And then as trumpets continue to be sounded through the chapters, things only get worse. Until we're hearing actually the stuff of nightmares and horror movies rather than thinking about cuddly baby Jesus. What is going on? Is this the angry, grumpy God of the Old Testament that I keep hearing about? Is this what you've suspected about God or gods all the time? That basically they're monsters, that they want to force people to behave, and if not, well, it's time for torture and death and destruction. I hope not. And I hope if you've been following any of these stories with me, you don't recognise that God either. I keep hearing about these kinds of gods, the kind of gods that people don't believe in, and most of the time I don't believe in those gods either. This letter in Revelation is for groups of Jesus followers struggling in the face of the Roman Empire machine in the first century. And the writer, John, hasn't had a simple, clear message dictated into his imagination for him then to write down. He's had a set of overwhelming experiences, visions. John's favourite word in this letter is like. It was like. They were like. It sounded like. It looked like. He's fighting to use his skill, his craft with words to capture these experiences and to shape them into this letter of comfort, but also of challenge. And so we have a glorious overflow of pictures, ideas and quotes from his Jewish story. A riot of sensations, emotions, reactions, ideas that are repeated from this angle and then from that angle and then gone forward and backwards, and they're multi-layered and they're repetitive and they jump in time from here to there. Overall, this assault, this sense seems to be about the broken condition of the human story, of the creation story. And about a repeating cyclical story of how God's good creation has gone off the rails. And the real dark and tragic consequences of that. But at the same time, a reality that the Creator God, the living God, the God revealed in the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth, is still moving forward his active, ongoing project to put that creation back on track. Guess which part this is in chapter 8 and 9. Is this the part where the angry, grumpy God throws his toys out the pram and decides to give up on the whole project? No. There's more going on. And whether it is in this letter images of horsemen or trumpets or angels, or later it's going to be bowls, These cycles of angles, of perspectives, of visions will highlight in lots of different ways, and here in a deeply shocking horror movie style set of scenes that should be screaming out to anybody who doesn't actually realise it already that things are not the way they're meant to be. That's actually what these groups of Jesus followers in the first century, under the pressure, the influences of the system, the Roman Empire, their way of thinking and controlling and selling and tempting, this is actually the wake up that these Jesus followers need to hear, and the comfort that this is not how it's supposed to be, and it's not how it has to be. Among the shocking images here, the kind of connections John's hearers would also have been making with their ancient story would be a fun exercise to actually take all day to pick through. But I think that might take us away today and distract us from the overall emotion and impact of what's going on in these scenes. For example, one thread might be smacking John's hearers clean in the face, and that's this one of plagues. What's described reminds them of their Jewish roots as a people in the story of their slavery in the power of the Egyptian Empire and to the Egyptian gods, and that at the heart of that story was a terrible set of plagues that were allowed by their God to show who had the real power and to shock and pressure the Pharaoh in charge to let God's people go. And those plagues were each designed, it seems, to shock, but also to cause the Egyptian machine all sorts of problems, and then to show up some of the many gods or fake gods the Egyptian Empire followed: river gods, animal gods, nature gods, insect gods, showing up the real power. And it's the same thing I see going on here. It's no surprise that one of the shofar, horn, trumpet announced plagues in this chapter affects the sea and the ships. This is not a random horror movie script. This is a political statement. Everything that the empire promises, the way they consume the world's resources, their food supply routes, their precious trade routes, their slave markets, their gods of commerce and consumption, are all shown up in these images as fake gods. And then on another level, there are ideas of blood and the water of life and light. And these are all images that run through the Jewish story. Life is in the blood, they're told. Blood is a powerful symbol in their temple sacrifices. The water of life is the water that God provides and sustains. God brings light. Jesus of Nazareth used these descriptions about himself. I am the way, the truth, and the life, the light of the world, the water of life. But these images here are about a distorted, twisted, corrupted horror show version of things that were intended to be good. And over it all, there's an eagle flies over crying, woe, 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 over it all. And John's listeners would shiver at the image of the eagle that was shoved in their faces regularly on the Roman flags or standards paraded before them. And then we have locust-like creatures or scorpion-like creatures, and they don't kill but they torture for periods of time, and they're also like horses ready for battle, and there are crowns of gold, and they have faces like humans and hair like humans, but they're not human. And none of this makes any sense, of course, and it's not supposed to. Horses and chariots are about war. Crowns were the symbols of the Roman emperor and his claims of being God and demanding worship. The angel of the abyss, Abaddon, Apollyon, they're all ancient and Hebrew and Greek ideas of the destroyer. And they're also maybe sly digs at the emperor of the time, Domitian, who claimed to be the reincarnation of the god Apollo. And then we have mention of the river Euphrates, and a terror for the Roman Empire was that the Euphrates was on their eastern border, and across it they constantly had attacks from other empires, and there lurked the legendary Parthian Empire with its amazing deadly cavalry division that kept winning battles against them. All these things are swirling around in these scenes. It's as if to say, here's what you're putting your faith in, what the empire is selling you, but these are all fake. They're all false, they're all worthless and powerless, but more than that, they're destructive and corruptive, and they want to attack you. This is a reality horror story, a diagnosis of deep, dangerous sickness. What's been displayed in these scenes is that when parts of creation reject who they are, what God has made them for, and they choose a different way, a way of self-centeredness, of exploitation, of shortcuts, of addiction, of using and abusing the people and the creation around, then the consequences are horror movie style. And God's people are caught in the middle and they cry out. We've heard before, they cry out, how long until God sorts this out? If I were to rush through chapter 8 and 9, looking at these scenes and, well, probably actually preferably looking at them from behind the sofa or through my fingers with my eyes mostly closed, I might miss little details like who's being affected by these terrible things. This is not random destruction. John makes it clear for us that what is being affected, what is being dealt with, is limited to what he calls, again, the earth dwellers. And it's kind of a shorthand for John that we've seen in his letter. This is an image he uses for specifically the parts of God's creation that have completely rejected him and are now working against him, against his creation project and against his creatures. The God, this letter is saying, the Creator, the living God, is the only one who put this together and the one who can sustain it, and he has heard his people's cry. And when he acts to get rid of the corrupting, the distorting, the abusive, the dangerous things, well, that will be devastating for those parts of the system and everything tied up with them. What John's describing, it seems, in this sets of images and cycles of effects and consequences are the inevitable result of going down that road. That the creation, the environment is ravaged, literally coming apart at the seams. And the decisive and surgical way that God then has to cut out the cancers of his creation are terrible for everything and everyone that has chosen to get deeper and deeper involved with that anti-creation system. But God's surgery, God's sorting that out, God's judgment, God's wrath is one of the words used. It is reserved for the cancer. And it is limited. John's vision is of a third destroyed, not everything. And about parts of it only lasting for 5 months. This is targeted. This is limited. This is not an angry God lashing out a grumpy child, smashing the project that he's fed up with. This is no horror movie monster just ravaging around. This is a heartbroken father, surgeon figure, determined that his creation will survive and flourish, but prepared, heartbroken to do what is necessary. Maybe the clue, or one of the clues, which is not hidden actually at all, is in towards the end of chapter 9, verses 20 and 21. I mean, the trumpets were a big enough clue in themselves, because trumpets were there to announce worship, but also to warn God's people. This God is desperate for his creation to turn around. It seems that the trumpets and all their effects are part of his cry, his warning. He wants them to turn around, to turn back, to come home. That's what the word repent means in these passages and throughout these stories. The Hebrew word teshuvah, to come back, to come home, to turn around. This God doesn't want these nightmares. This God doesn't want destruction. But this God knows the reality that these systems, the forces that his creation is, parts of it are giving themselves to, aren't just fake, they're deeply dangerous and destructive, like any addiction. They promise the world and they take much, much more. And they need to be resisted, they need to be avoided, or they need to be dealt with. Through my scared fingers, what I see is not, admittedly, a cuddly baby God, but it's also not an angry toddler or monster God, but it's a God of love, a God who hurts, a God of justice, and a God who wants his children, you and me, to be shaken up, to hear the warning signs, but then to turn around and to come home and have the life they were made for. Blessed is the one who reads the words of this prophecy and who hears it and takes it to heart.